So, Rachel, your new book, Chamber Divers, covers the story of a British team of scientists. It's set largely in London and Edinburgh. So, given that, why did you decide to write this book in American English instead of proper English?
All right, James, this interview is over.
Welcome to Divers Ready. My name's James. My guest today is Dr. Rachel Lance, Assistant Consultant Professor in the Department of Anesthesiology at Duke University. Dr. Lance is a biomedical engineer by training who specializes in injury biomechanics from blast and ballistic events. Her work, based at Duke University's Center for Hyperbaric Medicine and Environmental Physiology, is focused on aiding human survival in extreme environments, from the deep sea to outer space. Dr. Lance's first book, In the Waves, documented her quest to solve the mysterious sinking of the world's first successful combat submarine and was released in 2020. I met Rachel last year at Rebreather Forum 4, where she presented on the near future of physiological monitoring for divers and the myriad of diver-related studies she has her hands in to help keep us safer. I spoke to Rachel a few days ago via Zoom about the release of her new book, Chamber Divers, which chronicles the development of decompression science and gas physiology as studied by an elite and somewhat zany band of scientists during World War II. In Chamber Divers, Rachel has written the never-told-before story of J.B.S. Haldane, the father of decompression science, without whom recreational scuba diving as we enjoy it today simply would not exist. Haldane and his cast of colourful colleagues worked tirelessly in London during the Blitz on experiments that made submarine operations safer and paved the way for the use of rebreathers in special operations. Chamber Divers is released tomorrow, April 16th in the US, and on the anniversary of D-Day, June 6th in the United Kingdom. Welcome, Rachel. So great to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Congratulations. First and foremost, congratulations on a weighty tome. Your second book, Chamber Divers. Absolutely phenomenal. Thank you so much for sending me the advance copy so I could get my grubby little paws on it and read through it. Really riveting read. And I want to talk to you more about it. I got questions for you.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm here. I'm glad to hear all the nice words.
Fantastic. So let's start with, as every good book starts, the dedication. You've dedicated this book to your grandfather, the fantastically named Earl Strawbridge Lance. You dedicated it to his love for rocket launchers, underwater explosives, and rope swings. And you state that he was also a member of the Naval Combat Demolition Unit, which obviously goes nicely into the story that you have to tell. So it's a very appropriate dedication. But what else would you like to share that you can't fit on a dedication page of a book about your grandfather?
Yeah, that dedication was kind of my attempt to provide a brief explanation of who I remember my grandfather as, which is primarily like this big hulking bear of a man, which of course is my memory as a child, who used to just spend hours pushing me on a rope swing in his yard and walking with me through the woods to protect me from snakes and helping me pick berries in his farm. And that's how I remember him. But he also had this whole World War II history before that he just never talked about. And I actually didn't find out any of that about him until I'd actually gotten my PhD in underwater explosives. Then one day my dad and I pull my grandpa's service records, and it turns out his background is underwater explosives. So completely crazy coincidence. More specific thing could not have happened. And so when I was writing this book, I really tried to keep him in mind as to his experience. What happened to this generation of people? What did they go through for the sake of fighting Hitler and the Nazis? And what was that like to the degree that so many of them never talked about it again? So he really informed the perspective I tried to use as I was writing this book, which was to try and keep it related to individuals who were there, as opposed to a more zoomed out view of like divisions and units and ships.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And And it goes all the way up to D-Day and the sort of application of the sciences that we're discussing here. And it's important to note that, this book starts with the discovery of the condition of decompression sickness with the building of the Brooklyn Bridge, which some people watching this may already be familiar with, that's how we discovered something called the bends, or Caisson's disease as it was known then, all the way up through World War II to D-Day. So it's quite a chunk of history that all of this science was taking place, and we're learning about how humans can survive underwater. How much, in your opinion, do the sport divers of today owe to J.B.S. Haldane and his team of merry scientists at UCL?
Almost everything. Almost everything I know about a scientist working in this field traces back to JBS Haldane and this time period. And the story has never been told because for a really long time, it was completely classified. So it was classified until long after the group had passed away, which thankfully many of them did late in life of natural causes. But it, no one had ever been able to piece together all of the bits before because their notebooks were in one place, the official reports were in another, the reports were classified. All of these things needed to be linked by someone who was passionate enough about diving and about diving stories to put them together. But these people were looking at not just decompression sickness, early stages of decompression sickness. They were discovering that oxygen is more toxic underwater than in air. So they were discovering the early limits for oxygen toxicity on themselves. They did the first real enriched oxygen blends. So these people were essentially the inventors of nitrox, at least in terms of testing it, testing whether it worked the same in decompression, testing whether their math applied. So they gave the world the first nitrox blends. And they were doing all of this stuff while also being bombed. So in terms of scientific accomplishments, what they did was massive. And putting together this book is actually going to result in also several scientific papers on diving related topics for me, where I'm just going to republish their data and give them credit, but let more people access it and use it for research.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's super cool. Yeah, you weave the story so well. Being a scientist yourself and getting into the details of the experiments and the case notes and the logs and everything from all the experiments they were doing in the chambers. But then you set it so brilliantly against the backdrop of the Blitz. This is happening in London while the Blitz is happening all around them, and that they're going home to shelters, they're on rationing, they have power outages and all these struggles that come with war, while trying to break science, and also sort of in a race against time, so to speak. So it speaks to the enormity of the achievement. It's not just I sat under an apple tree and an apple fell on my head. Oh, gravity. No, these guys were like doing this through war, whilst being bombed. So I think that comes across really, really clearly. And the scope of the book is huge. As I said, it ranges from the building of the Brooklyn Bridge up to D-Day. And as with your first book, In the Waves, regarding the first combat submarine, it's exhaustively researched. I know you made a trip to London and Edinburgh, where a lot of the action in the book takes place. Talk to me a little bit about your research process.
Oh, my research process is essentially what happens if you unleashed slight compulsiveness on archival records. I didn't actually get to go to Edinburgh. For that part, I had to find the records remotely because it was the middle of the pandemic. And thankfully, once things opened up a little bit, they were allowing people to go in once per week. That wasn't sustainable for me to do all the research. So I worked with a delightful lady with pink hair over there who just copied everything for me and sent it. But yeah, then as soon as the archives in London opened up a bit more, I got over there. So that kind of tells you the amount of time that's required to do this. When you're putting together these stories, you're going to go through 50 records for every one that will be useful to you, because you don't know exactly what you're going to find in each one. You're like, oh, record 298/15 report on diving. And that's all the information you have. So you're like, okay, I'll request this. I'll read it. It's 60 pages. We'll see if it's useful. And maybe I'll find something. So a lot of this is patience and being willing to sit in a cold library and read old documents and piece them together into an exhaustive timeline. So that was the biggest part of it, was keeping everything organized, putting it together into a timeline. It's a bit like trying to put together a puzzle where you don't know what the picture is going to look like until you're done. So every time you see a piece that looks like it might be the right color or the right shape, you say, okay, this might be part of my puzzle. And you see if you can fit it in there. And then that, in the end, it gives you a picture, and that picture is a story of what really happened.
Yeah. And it really is, through that research, it's not just the science and the experiments, but you've made it a very human story. These are real people living real lives. You've got into their family lives, their home lives, and really, cast their personalities into the story as well, which I think is just a fantastic achievement. It's very easy to find, well, not very easy, but it's easier to find cold numbers and facts and reports and so on than to actually read between the lines and see the personality in someone's writing or their relationship with their father, and all of that is meticulously detailed in the book. It's very, 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 very clever.
Thanks. I really wanted to add that context because to me, doing science has context. These are individual human beings. It's not just like, oh, someone in a stock photo of a lab tube. So these stories were put together because they were writing them down on tiny slips of paper while they were stuck in a chamber. So when I say like they slammed a note against the portal window, I know that because that note got saved and put in a library in Edinburgh, and I could see the writing they scribbled on it and then slammed against there, hoping someone on the outside would save their lives. So I really needed to like convey that sense of the history as part of this human story.
Yeah, absolutely phenomenal. And on that note, you make a good point. When I was reading this book, I was very much drawing a parallel between the work of J.B.S. Haldane at UCL and the work of Alan Turing at Bletchley Park and the solving of the Enigma machine. I think there's a lot of similarities. You've got an avant-garde genius scientist who's assembled a ragtag bunch of recruits and scientists and specialists. I can't speak. Sorry, let me start again. Sorry.
Go for it.
Yeah, no, I think that's incredibly important, and you touch on a good point there, which is while I was reading this book, you can't help but draw a parallel between the work of JBS Haldane at UCL and Alan Turing at Bletchley Park trying to solve the Enigma machine. Both of them assembled a group of scientists around them. Both of them had very, very strong personalities as leaders of that group. Both of them were tasked with enormous pressure by the government to solve critical problems towards the war effort, and both of them were in a race against time to prevent the invasion of the United Kingdom, which was surely coming. So there's a lot of similarities there. The biggest difference, of course, with Alan Turing is that computer science usually doesn't require self-experimentation. Usually. We joke before camera roll, but usually you don't need to do. The scientists in your story were getting into the chamber themselves, were opening valves on funky gases that the science was unknown as to what was going to happen to them, pressurizing themselves down to, what we would consider today to be insane depths, and just opening valves and seeing what would happen on themselves. So where does Dr. Rachel Lance, research scientist, stand on the topic of self-experimentation and the ethics thereof?
I'm a little bit biased. I think that self-experimentation is a good way to guarantee that you have a consenting subject. But at the same time, there are really reasonable rules in the community about not publishing or using data from self-experiments because we are biased. I can possibly be swayed by my own wishes for the experiment to be successful, right? Like the reason we no longer have self-experimentation publicly is because we want to make sure that the data are robust and trustworthy. And no one is being subject to a scientist's opinion or deepest desires for their project to work. But I say that pretty much every scientist who can get useful data from themselves has tried it at some point. I know that I was looking at a new Doppler and I definitely let a coworker put an IV on me and inject my veins with bubbles so we could see if the Doppler picked it up. Like this is you're there, you're a body. It's helpful. Um, but yeah, what I think you see during this time of war as well is not only that, but both of those groups are doing absolutely whatever they can to apply their specific skill set. So Alan Turing, yeah, those people were working through the night. Those people were driving themselves crazy. They were living on site. I think if they had been able to use their own bodies to code, they probably would have. So,
Probably. Yeah.
and the same thing, we owe all of scuba to this time period as well, because Jacques Cousteau is inventing scuba in occupied France at the same time for the same reasons and almost guaranteed testing it on himself too.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely, absolutely. So, truly remarkable there. I mean, some of the stories you treat the extravagant self experimentation in the book of them just jumping in a chamber and knocking themselves out, or breathing some funky gas and being sick on themselves, with a lot of humor. But it's incredibly, you have chapter titles like "Drunk and Doing Math," which I thought was brilliant. That's like, it's hilarious. So you're injecting a lot of humor into what could otherwise be a quite dark and serious subject. They didn't know where the limits for decompression were until they bent themselves and went, oh,
right.
that was a bit much, or that
Right.
was a bit steep, or that was a bit, too big, or whatever.
They know it like too far
Yeah,
this
yeah,
time.
that's where the limit is there. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, and you treat the subject with a lot of seriousness, but you also manage to inject a lot of humor, which is great. So I want to read to you from, if I may, the TDI Decompression Procedures Manual. So this
Go
is
for
a
it.
handbook given to every wannabe tech diver student, and the only reference to JBS Haldane is a little paragraph that says John Scott Haldane and tissue compartments. In 1908, Haldane became the first person to create and publish dive tables based on a scientifically predicted decompression model. The tables were printed in the Journal of Hygiene. Haldane's conclusions were adopted worldwide, and his methods set the foundation for most modern decompression models. Next chapter. That's it. That's his only reference. And yet you have written a weighty tome on his exploits and the exploits of all of his different team members here, to, I don't know, bring justice, shine a light. What's going on there? Why hasn't this been tackled before?
I think it's just a complicated and nuanced topic that needs the human story in order to discuss it in an interesting way. That's why it's fascinating to me, because as a hyperbaric scientist, I read between the lines for these experimental reports and these results, and I try to understand what it took to get them. That's my natural instinct. How would I set up that experiment myself? And so a lot of these early decompression stuff, reading between the lines, I was just like, holy hell, this is some serious science. Like, this is some serious work. And that made me really want to dig into it, what these people were doing and how they were motivated. And that was a big part of my motivation too, was when I was a baby diver and I was learning all this stuff, the modeling aspect really fascinated me. And I was buying other books and not really finding sufficient information about how the models were developed. If you start buying like the diving textbooks, yes, you can find the math, but you never find the stories of how that math came about. And I really wanted to tell that part, in part because I think it deserves to be told. These people deserve some recognition for the risks that they took, but also because as a diver, it's really important for us to understand what we're doing to our own bodies and what level of certainty we know when we're using these models for our own safety.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that was like, we met at RF4, obviously, the rebreather forum for last year.
Yeah.
And one of my takeaways from the forum in general, your fantastic presentation on the work you do at Duke and all the variety of different projects that you have your hands on, to the scrubber presentation on scrubber duration, to diving in remote locations and safety margins and mixed mode teams. And every presentation, part of the summary was, well, we still don't know X.
Yeah.
it's still such a young science.
Right.
And you know, books like yours are going to help keep it in the present and keep pushing the story forwards, and giving people an appreciation of, like, hey, this is what we know. There's still so much that we don't know, and I think that's hugely important for divers to understand, is that, you know, when somebody gets bent today on a recreational scuba dive and they come up and they've, like me, done everything right, I cleared my computer, I did my stops, I didn't come up fast, why did I go to the chamber? Well, there's still so much we still don't know, and these are the variables, and this is what we're working on. So it all ties to modern sport diving, and I think this is where it all starts. So anyone with an interest in knowing what's happening to their body while diving will get a big kick out of this book for sure.
I'll just end this with saying that I absolutely agree with you. This is where it started. And we know that because at the end of the war, when things started clearing up and there was a lot less bombing, there's a handwritten note from Jacques Cousteau to J.B.S. Haldane saying, thank you and your lab for hosting me and teaching me everything I know about underwater physiology.
Yeah.
So Jacques Cousteau, who has just during the same time period invented the scuba that we all know and love, learned everything he knew about underwater physiology from this group because of what they were doing during this time frame.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I did want to talk to you about rebreathers and the clandestine operations and submarine egress, but I think we're probably out of time, so maybe we can put a pin in that.
Okay.
The book is out on April the 16th, is that correct?
That's correct for the US version. If you would like the UK English, it's out on June 6th.
Oh, we got to wait longer? Why?
Anniversary of D-Day. You got to wait for the Americans to come help you.
Oh, really? There you go.
Yeah.
Congratulations again. Fantastic.
Thank
I wish you all the best of luck with the book. And what's next for Rachel Lance? You got a topic for book number 3?
I do, but it's not public yet. I'm working on it. I'm putting together my timeline. Yeah.
Spoilers. I like
it will be naval. It's another, I can say it's another true story. It'll be naval. There will be less diving, but there's a lot of explosions on ships and stuff. We're headed to World War I for this one.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
It'll be fun. Yeah.
Thanks. Best, Rachel. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks.
Chamber Divers by Dr. Rachel Lance is available in the US from tomorrow. Divers in the UK will have to wait until June 6th, the 80th anniversary of D-Day, for the release of the version in proper, correct English. I want to thank Dr. Lance again for her time and for sharing this incredible untold story with the world. It is a fantastic read, highly recommended for all divers who want a better understanding of where the rules come from that we use every day in our favourite pastime. Thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so already, and I'll see you in the next video. Dive safe, dive often.